Hi, everyone, and welcome to Practice Growth HQ. Now, today we're going to talk about a very important topic for the listeners of this podcast, which is scaling healthcare and how it's different to scaling other businesses. And the perfect person to be talking about this is my guest, Dr. Lincoln Harris. Now, Lincoln started as a dentist in rural Queensland, but because he needed to get education, and that meant going online, that resulted in him being the co-founder of something called Ripe Global, one of the fastest growing dental training organizations in the world, set to become number one in the world. Originally from near Bundaberg in Queensland, currently in Colorado in the USA. Welcome, Lincoln.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
All right, Lincoln, we like to start with the fast five. Quicker questions, quicker answers, so people can get to know you quickly. Question one, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Brisbane, Tyro, and Bundaberg, so all on farms. I'm a farm boy, and this is the first time I haven't had a farm in a long time.
Well, there you go. So this is a strange one because I was born in Brisbane and I now live on a farm, but I've actually never lived on one before. All right, question two, favorite book besides your own?
My favorite book is one by Enid Blyton, which I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. And the reason it's my favorite is it was the one that started my love of reading. So it was before I started the Famous Five series. It was the Magic Tree or the Wishing Tree or something.
Okay.
A tree that had a different land on the top. Anyway, that one, because that was the first book that I read that wasn't what I'd call a picture book. So my love of reading started.
Here we go. I must admit I'm a pretty keen reader myself. Is there perhaps there's lots, but is there one business book that sticks in your mind?
I haven't read one for a while. There was one way back that I read of some famous investor in Australia who wrote a lot of books back then. So long since I read it, I can't remember it. It's an investment book. It was basically about save your money and invest it. Actually, the single best business thing that I have ever read, and it's not a book, is Warren Buffett's letters to shareholders for Berkshire Hathaway. You read them, start at 1965, read the whole lot. They're entertaining, and it's some of the best business book that you could ever read.
In fact, it is a book. It's in the bookcase behind me. Somebody's turned it into a book. Indeed, I interviewed someone recently who'd made a book out of the Amazon Jeff Bezos letters to shareholders as well, because it's an interesting one. I suppose, in a sense, that's your target audience, isn't it? If you're the owner of the business writing to your shareholders, that's about as important as it gets. All right, very interesting.
Yeah.
Question three, Lincoln, what's one of your superpowers?
I never panic under pressure.
Okay, that's good. Perhaps,
They also say that that's a sign of ADHD, so who knows?
is that right? Were you an athlete at all?
No.
No, okay. I was going to say that's certainly
wasn't.
something that athletes need as well, don't they? All right, question four, something you wish your 20-year-old self knew.
That you could invest in a business. So when I was young, I only thought you could invest in real estate, shares, all of these types of things. And the idea of investing in a business as an asset wasn't really something that was on my radar. But obviously businesses are the best things to invest in because they generate the cash flow necessary to buy the things. Can't get any better than that.
Yeah, indeed. And question five, something you're grateful for.
Right now, I'm grateful for this opportunity that I've had. So the things that I do are very difficult. It's by far the most difficult things I've ever done. And when I started this business, I didn't know anything about capital raising. I didn't know anything about investors. I didn't know anything about software teams, hardware engineering, all of this stuff, patent attorneys, immigration attorneys. So all of these things, I basically had the opportunity in my life to start a career, and then I've had the opportunity, once I got really good at it to the point where it starts to get a bit dull, to start a second one. So I'm super grateful for that. It's been quite painful, but I sit there and I choose to go, it's actually, these are all the things I get because of that painful experience.
Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. Look, I think it's fair to say that there would be a significant number of listeners who would identify with what you're describing. The listeners at Practice Growth HQ, some of them are earlier in their practice, but in many cases, they've been in their game for some time and they can identify, I've been grinding it out 10, 20 years, whatever the case may be, and probably had some success. They're listening to this show because they want to grow more, but there is a part of them, I'm sure, that goes, Second career, what an interesting thing to talk about. For me personally, and I'm in business now, and I've been in business for the last 10 years, this is actually about my fourth career, and I'm 56 years old. I was a bureaucrat, I was a diplomat at one point, I was a professional musician at one point, I worked in pharmaceutical at one point, and then eventually set up my own business, and now I love working with healthcare professionals. Tell us about your journey that led to setting up that second career.
Okay, so I was a farm boy. My parents actually went bankrupt when I was about 10. So I had a number of priorities, and I graduated in 93. So that was 1 year after the recession that we had to have in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the reason my parents went bankrupt is they were paying 24% interest on their farm mortgage, which is
Wow.
quite steep. Actually, the baseline rate was 19%, but as you got closer to default in those days, they would raise the interest rate, which would obviously send you into default faster. So my priorities when I graduated as a child were do something science-based because I like sciencey stuff, and two, do something that was less risky than farming. So that's what I did. And I went to a dentist just before I had to choose, and I thought it was really interesting. So I called my sister and said, what about dentistry? She was doing medicine. She said, it's great because they don't do after hours. And so that was like the long, logical process to being a dentist. In 2006, I started running luxury ski conferences at Whistler and then at Vail. So it's actually quite poetic to be back here in Colorado because I am now 2 hours drive from Vail. That was a complete disaster. So I learned a lot about projecting education globally, but I lost about, I don't know, $400,000. And so I quit doing that, said I will never teach again. And I just went back to dentistry and I applied all of the marketing knowledge and energy that I put into conferences into my practice. The practice went bonkers. I was quite happy not teaching. And then we had a massive flood.
Where was your practice?
It was at Bargara, which is near Bundaberg. So it's that region has held the title for highest unemployment in Queensland for a long time.
Wow, so that's not the title you want, and yet you were able to grow a very rapidly growing practice there. How did you do that?
Part of it's just being a bit arrogant. This is partly a personality thing, so I don't know if you can just do this, but I had this belief that my practice was going to be absolute world class. So when we started it, the goal was that you would get as good dentistry in this remote rural town as you could get in New York or London or Sydney or anywhere in the world. So that was the benchmark, world as good as anywhere in the world. We focused on really looking after the patients. And I guess the thing that really set us up was we were uncompromising in the first few years, which meant that I earned a lot less for the first 5 years than an average dentist does. But then over time, that reputation just built and built. And towards, I guess, the end of my actual practicing career, the reputation of the practice was so strong that we would get people come in from very long distances away. That was the big change, I guess, was in about 2006. I met up with a bunch of guys who were doing a lot of marketing. And because I was in a regional area, I could afford TV ads because they're cheap. So I started doing TV. It's been super useful because I started speaking to camera from 2007. So,
Right, okay.
yeah. And then with marketing, the practice just really took off. It's this virtuous loop. You market complex procedures. And so then you get more patients who want complex procedures. Procedures are better paid than simple ones. And then you get really good at them because of the volume that you're doing. And so your skills go up and you actually become really good. And then your revenue goes up and you can afford to spend more on marketing. And so it just goes right around. So we've spent 5% on marketing since 2006.
Okay. Are you still connected with the practice?
I am. I'll probably sell it shortly because I don't have the mental bandwidth to focus on it the way I used to. And it's a great opportunity for the people who buy it.
Okay, interesting. Listeners, if you're interested in buying, drop us a line and I'll make the connection. And for a small commission, Lincoln, we can make this happen. You said something about what you described as arrogance. Others might call it confidence, that sense of I'm determined that even though it's in regional Queensland, we're going to create a world-class practice. I was watching a biography this week on Tom Brady, perhaps the most successful American footballer of all time. And I've heard Tony Robbins describe this as certainty. And basically, when Tom Brady came into the New England Patriots, he was like the fourth string quarterback. Like a number of other guys had to get injured in front of him for him to even get a game. And he said something that some listeners would go, this is very arrogant. But he said to the owner of the New England Patriots, hiring me will be the best decision you've ever made. So this is coming from a fourth string guy. Like two or three had to get injured before he could even get a game. And some people would look at that and go, that's really arrogant. But for him, he was so clear in his mind what he was going to achieve. And he wasn't even, they interviewed his high school coaches and his college coaches, and they were like, this guy wasn't even fast. Like, he was quite a big guy, but he wasn't that fast. But it was just his focus and his certainty about where he was going to go. And fast forward 20 years, the greatest of all time, they tell him. So I find that an interesting one.
There's a nicer word for it, which is just vision. So
Yeah.
in business, we set a vision, and our human tendency is to set the vision low because then we can't fail. Really saying this practice will be as good as anywhere in the world. And actually, the practice became quite famous in the end. I think that is just a vision, really. And a vision is just this thing you have to aim for. It's like up there, you aim for it. You've got to be very careful with your arm at the moment. Like, you're allowed your arm up to here, and then you've got to go like that. If you want to point up, anything between that other zone is the danger zone. There's a new type of clothing you get, locks your arm, so it can't go any higher. Anyway, like, the vision is this thing that you aim for, and no matter how hard it is and how difficult everything around you and how many side quests you go on and all of the difficulty, you can aim for that thing and you just keep aiming for it. And then you definitely may not get there, but you won't get there if you don't aim for something. So now, I also keep in mind that I had the other business, the conference business, where I aimed for a thing and it just never happened. And at some point after 5 years, I said, okay, I've got to cut this off. Like, determinations, this is a dead duck. I need to.
Yeah. Yeah. In the Tom Brady story, like, if the guy's got no talent at all, in his case, playing American football, then no amount of certainty is going to do the thing for you. But I think there are many cases where I've just heard countless interviews with people in business and in sport and other things where they go, look, I know I wasn't the best, but it was just that tenacity to keep going. Robert Kiyosaki, perhaps the biggest seller of business books of all time, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I believe he sold in the order of 500 million books. And he says about himself, I'm not the best author. I'm just the best marketed author. What an extraordinary statement from perhaps the biggest selling author. Who knows, maybe Tony Robbins has sold a few more business books now, but it's a massive number. And he says, no, I wasn't the best. I just was the best marketed author, which I think is a fascinating statement. All right, Lincoln, I just want to spend a minute because you spoke about how difficult it was and how painful it was. And I feel like we should spend a minute there before we go on to where you find yourself now. What were some of the challenges you faced and how did you get through the pain of it all?
So I think businesses in generally is painful at least some of the time. So that's just normal because it's like a fairly brutal sport. You've got everyone around you trying to kill your business so they can make theirs better, largely. So it's like the most intellectual of combat sports. I think that, like in dentistry for sure, sticking to your vision when there is a quicker way to make money in the short term, that's a tough one. And also, you get a good year and it's nearly always followed by either a average or a worse year. And like, everyone has sat there at some point, particularly if you've got a lot of staff and a lot of overheads, going, I'm going to run out of money in 8 weeks' time if something doesn't change. Because the periods where you're earning no money and things are really difficult, when you're going through them, they seem incredibly long. So with dentistry in particular, you look at the appointment book and you've got this big space where there's no patients. You go, oh my goodness, like, no one loves me anymore. I'm going to go broke and everyone hates my style and I should do something different. And then on the morning of the day, someone calls with an emergency and someone else has a broken tooth and so on. And so by the end of the day, there's maybe 4 appointments booked in this day where you thought that there was none. So when you go back a year later and look at the same period of time, you actually can't find this desert that you thought you were going through. So at the time you're going through it, you go, oh my goodness, there's nothing tomorrow, I'm going to die. And then you get a few, but you discount that because you've already had the thought. And then a year later, you go back and go, what was that? So I think that was one. The other one was the conference. When the conference just ran out. I think the most important period, though, was just before the floods. I bought a lot of real estate. So I really loaded up with gearing. And then we had a flood, and then the practice income dropped 50% just overnight, and it didn't recover for about 3 years.
Wow.
And I went to the bank at one point and I said, I can't pay the mortgage this month. Now, I had a whole thing about this because my parents had gone bankrupt. So I just thought that the moment you said that, they just came around the next day with the trucks and bundled you out of your house and sold it all up. And I didn't realize you actually have to try quite hard to go broke because the bank doesn't want to bankrupt anyone. It costs them a lot. Like to repossess your house and sell it on you, they will lose 30 to 40% of the house's value just in the transaction fees of a repossession. That taught me that when you think you've run out of options, you always have a lot more left if you don't give up. So that period of time was super important to me now because I'm doing a capital raising business. That means we plan to burn cash every month so that we can build stuff bigger and faster. Or if you want to put it in a new way, I'm doing a business where our business plan is we plan to lose money for 5 or 7 years after we start so we can grow out of all proportion to our revenues. And that is really unnatural.
Yeah. Wow. There's some great insights there. I think I have thought quite a bit about our perspective on time. There are times something amazing happens in your business, and I would say I could be feeling unhappy within 2 days. Like day off, that's awesome. For example, recently the accountant contacted us. So I've got a few entities, and lo and behold, a big whopping tax check arrives. Completely unexpected. Tax. Lincoln, I'm expecting to get a bill, not a check. Whopping big check. That's fantastic. That's amazing. Manna from heaven. I wasn't expecting it. But I notice in our own perspectives, it's 2 days later, it's, oh yeah, okay, what's next? Now, maybe that's the sort of entrepreneurial mindset. I don't know. And I think, as you say, you can be in the middle of what feels like quite a tough time, and it feels like I've been here for years, when in reality it may be a much shorter time. But it's that, I've heard it said, it's a little bit trite, but I quite like the sentiment, which is losers look at what they're going through, winners look at what they're going to. And there is that sense of that vision. This is where I'm heading to. And it's, yes, today sucks, or this moment or this hour sucks, but you just got to keep moving on.
I think that there's actually some psychology around why time changes. You have a short experience that just fills a large part of your memory and seems like it was disproportionately long. And it's the way we lay down memory. So in normal days where we're not doing anything remarkable, we don't actually lay down a memory of that day, so we just forget it. And when we do something extraordinary, whilst we're going through it, I can't remember the reason why it feels like time's going faster, but then afterwards it feels like a much longer experience than it was because we laid down such an intense memory. So if you look over the last month, you actually only remember the intense bits. So you remember the intensely good bits and then obviously the intensely bad bits. Unfortunately, humans are built for bad news more than good news. We tend to focus on that. I would also say that business is not good that often. So what I mean by that is in a given week, you're likely to have one day maybe that's terrific, and you're probably going to have one day that's awful, and the rest will just be like, nah, like that's just kind of life. I don't think anyone has 5 days a week where it's just everything's awesome except for maybe Tony.
Yeah, okay. That's a really interesting insight, listeners. I'm going to repeat that one because Lincoln is saying that, and as he's saying that, there's a part of me that's going, he's absolutely right. If I think about a normal week for me, perhaps I have one day where things go really well. Yeah, as you say, probably 2 or 3 days where I just go through the motions, and then perhaps you'll have a bad day. And I don't think that's being overly negative either. I just think that's the reality. Business, we're paid to solve problems. I believe Jeff Bezos says, or no, it's Elon Musk who says we are paid in relation to the size of problem that we fix. And so that's what we are. So if you hate the idea of having problems laid in front of you, then you probably shouldn't be in business. Anyway, we're here to grow business. Look, thank you for your backstory. Let's talk about the new venture. Now, the new venture is not new. You've been doing it for some time, but things are really escalating. Where did it come from? And just tell us about the journey.
Yeah, so I started doing conferences. That was my first education thing. Complete dismal failure, but it was like my MBA because I learnt to do business at an international scale a long time ago. Then I actually started teaching again out of desperation. So I started building hands-on. So the big innovation with our hands-on is I realized I've been trained as a pilot. And when you're a pilot, you don't do tons of theory and a tiny bit of flying. If you do, no one wants to fly with you. You do large amounts of flying and you repeat the exercise over and over again. And you do it at full speed because planes can't go half speed. They either go full speed and then there's like the stall speed, and after that you die. And so I compared the way dentists were trained with the way pilots were trained and realized that if you train pilots like dentists, everyone would die because dentists get trained for perfectionism and pilots get trained for skill. And so dentists will get one repetition of a procedure and they get marked down for every mistake when they're at dental school, and they do it very slowly. And a pilot, you just do it, and then you go, hey, we could do this better, and you do it again, and you go, we could do this better, and you could do it again, and you just do it again, and you do it again and again, and the same for scuba dive. And you practice the difficult scenarios, and you make it real. So our first innovation was we just started doing hands-on training for dentists, which was more realistic. So we did massive repetitions. We focused on skill, not perfection, because perfectionism gets in the way of being skillful.
Yeah, okay.
And then that was all going very well. Everything was great. I'd wanted to scale this business globally, but I didn't have the time. 2020, I suddenly had the time. So March 12th, March 5th, I flew out of Sydney successfully. We're sold out for 1 year ahead with our courses. One of the most successful courses in Australia, ran courses all over the world. March 12th, I shut that business down, started a new one.
Wow.
Because we're sitting there at home. We'd been locked down for 6 days at this point. And I said, I always complain I didn't have the time. I can either sit here and have a cry, or I can go big. Been wanting to, so let's go big. And then you always have to follow up with, how hard can it be? And then you found out, really fucking hard. So anyway, but the good thing is by the time you realize how hard something is, it's too late. You've nearly done it.
Yeah.
So I then shut down my old business. I said, I'm going to go 100% cloud-based. Like within 5 days of COVID, I had disrupted my own business completely. So I had turned my whole business into an entirely new model where it was 100% cloud-based. And then we started with the idea, if a dentist could never travel again, how would you train them with a hands-on skill? Now, the barrier to entry to doing video content online is very low. The barrier to entry to teaching someone a surgical skill online is very high because you need hardware and you need logistics and you need teachers and you need people to manage time zones all around the world because people join a class by time zone, not by country. That led to cloud simulation, where we have simulation kits that we ship to the dentist. They then log into our platform and they will join a class and we will say, okay, this is the procedure you need to do, go and do it. And then they upload photos and video and then we can assess it and then we go do it again and again. And then that's how you teach a skill. So that we're still the only company in the world that does this to any extent 4 years later. We were the ones who started it and now we're 5 years ahead of everyone else. In the process of doing that, the learning management systems we could buy were no good. The learning management system you would buy would do video content, or it would do structured courses, or it would do some other thing. So then we had, okay, we need to build our own. So we've built our own learning management system, which does structured courses, video online, does chat, does communities, does business collaboration. And then more recently, we said, we need hardware that is smart hardware, hardware that's connected. So
Wow.
in the next few weeks, we will release the biggest upgrade in dental training in 100 years, where for the first time, a dentist will get real-time feedback while they're training, no matter where they are in the world. So that's coming soon. That's about as much as I can tell you about that because the patents are still underway. And so this is how you start out with teaching as a dentist, and then suddenly you have to quit dentistry. You start getting visas for America. You are raising investment rounds. You're employing CFOs. You have a software engineering team. You have a hardware engineering and computer human interface engineering team. And you have 5-person marketing department plus a online paid specialist company, and start spending $1 million a year just on Mark Zuckerberg. And it's really exciting. Like, it's so fun when it's
yeah.
not really scary.
Yeah, I can sense the roller coaster. I was on a plane recently coming back to Australia, and I ended up watching a movie that was called, words to the effect of the making of The Matrix, the movie. And it just struck me, the thing that I took away from watching that, which is basically a doco, was that one of the things that made the movie The Matrix so extraordinary for its time was when you looked at the interviews, there was a whole stack of things they did in the movie that had never been done before, and they had to create. The technology didn't exist. There was all these different things. As a viewer, you just sit there and go, well, entertaining movie, what a unique concept. But there was many of the things that they wanted to do in the movie couldn't be done before the movie, and then they had to discover how the technology worked and then get the various parties involved. And so what you're describing in your business in many ways is very similar. It's, hey, we've got this vision. By the way, what we want can't be done, hasn't been done. So we've got to arrange to create and build the things ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, the most difficult thing when you build a whole new industry or a whole new way of doing something. So first of all, you're sitting there just trying to solve problems. That's literally all it is. Part of the reason why did we solve the problem of not being able to fly? Because it was middle of COVID, no one could fly. And I wasn't in a major capital city. So the small moments when things did open up, I still couldn't run any education. So that's that. And then we built a software team because we couldn't get stuff to work. It was just too cumbersome. And we built software initially on top of a CRM, which we use HubSpot, like Salesforce, because it gave us all the single sign-on things and stuff that you can get with a CRM. But then we couldn't scale it because if we tried to, like right now, I could offer you my platform. And so you go, hey, Lincoln, I want to start running courses and I want to not use Microsoft Teams anymore to talk to my internal people. You could just bolt our platform in. The thing is, previously, that would add $65,000 every extra person we added because we had these license fees. Part of to get rid of the license fees, we just had to build it. By building the software ourselves, now we get data. And for the first time, we will actually get real-time data from a dentist while they're training. We will be able to know how efficient they are at procedures, which in healthcare, if we bring it back to that, the efficiency that you do a procedure with can massively affect the income of the business. That really leads into the thing that's so different about healthcare businesses over other businesses. In a normal business, you have a designing engineer, you have a consultant who comes in and gets or a sales guy comes in and gets the measure of the business and what their problems are, and then you develop a plan, and then you sell that to them, and then engineer people come in and work out how they're going to make it work, and then you have all the installation guys come, and then you have accounts do all the talk about money, and post implementation you have the customer service people who look after them, and then you have an account manager. And in healthcare, many of those roles, sales, diagnosis, the engineering, the architecture, the installation, post-operative customer service, are all done by a massively highly trained clinician. And so it's not, you can't just go, I worked at Bunnings and I know how to run a Bunnings store, so I can run a dental practice or a group of dental practices. Because if you treat those dentists like they're a commodity, your EBITDA will go down.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Lincoln, and as we start to come to a close in this podcast, just tell us about Global, which is the business that you've created, and you've described some of the things that you've had to overcome. What's next? Where are you seeing this company in, I don't know, 3 years' time, 5 years' time? What can we expect?
I expect that it will become the platform that almost everyone uses to teach dentists with, and then potentially other allied healthcare fields. I am relatively confident that it will become the biggest platform for teaching skilled surgical professionals globally. I think we can list on NASDAQ, but we'll see.
Okay. There we are. You've heard that first on Practice Growth HQ, everyone. Lincoln, if people want to get in touch or learn more, what should they do?
There's a few reasons they can get to learn more. If you are in a healthcare field and you really want an all-encompassing learning management system, sure, go to lincoln.harris@ripeglobal. We can send it out, I'm sure, put it in the description.
Yes.
If they are interested in investing in a company prior to IPO and they fit with accredited investors, I'd love to talk to you. I think they're called retail investors, but people who are passionately involved rather than private equity funds, we deal with those as well, but they basically only care about EBITDA and they don't often focus on the value that you can bring to society and to, like, we get better results at 1/4 the cost and indefinitely scale with new technology. That's a pretty good combo for dental teaching as we go forward. So there, if you're interested, if you've got a group practice and you want help training your dentists to improve your quality and your performance, reach out. If you have a massive DSO with the biggest one we're working with is 4,000 dentists. We have experience with a lot of that. And yeah, if you're an investor, reach out, send me a message.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for your time, Lincoln. I really appreciate it. So it's lincoln.harris@ripeglobal.com, lincoln.harris @ripeglobal.com. Thanks again for your time, Lincoln. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
All right, everyone, we've covered a lot there, haven't we? I suspect this is more an episode about kind of inspiration, but I dare say there's some things you picked up from that you can use and implement in your own journey. Before you go on to the next thing, what is the one thing you can do as a result of what you've heard today? Make sure you go and do that. Finally, if you got some value from our time together today, then please head to where you heard this show and leave us a lovely review to give us the encouragement to bring you more great content every week on Practice Growth HQ.